Thanks for tuning in at Brackeys.
So, what happens when we are waiting? Well, currently we don't have any logic for this. Well, first off, when we are waiting, it means that we've spawned all of our enemies, but we don't want to be counting down just yet. Firstly, we need to give a player a chance to kill off all of these enemies. Some wave spawners do it on a fixed countdown timer, but I like the ones that wait until you've killed off the entire wave before giving you a new challenge. So in order to do this, up here under the update method, we're going to say if state is equal to spawn state dot waiting. Well, then we want to check if our player has killed all of the enemies. So let's make a method for that. So here we want to check if enemies are still alive. So we can do this down here, and we're going to make this a return type of bool because we want to be returning true or false depending on whether or not we still have an enemy alive. And we're simply going to call this enemy is alive. And what we're going to do in here is we could do a very simple check. Simply say if GameObject dot find GameObjects with tag, and then we could give all enemies a tag of, let's say, enemy. And this returns an array of all enemies or of all game objects with this tag. So we could say that if that has a length of 0, well then there are no enemies. We could also simply do GameObject dot find GameObject with tag in singular, and again put in enemy here and say that if that is equal to null, meaning if we haven't found anything, well then we want to simply return return false, meaning that no enemy is alive. And then if not, we return true. This is a very simple check, and this is going to work just fine. Just know that this is a fairly taxing operation, because if we have a lot of game objects in our game, which is natural that we'll have if we spawn a bunch of enemies and have buildings and all kinds of stuff, and particle system, it's going to loop through everything in order to find objects with this tag. So instead, what we want to do is set this on a fixed timer, so it will only check whether or not an enemy is alive, let's say once a second instead of every frame, because that's just unnecessary. The player really won't notice if we only do this one time each second. So in order to put this on a timer, we basically make a lot of this, we basically do the same trick as with the wave countdown here. So instead of having a wave countdown, we'll have a private float. We don't need to see this in the inspector. And this is going to be the, I'm going to call this the search countdown. And you could, if you wanted to, we are going to default this to 1. You could have a time between searches variable, but I think we'll just hard code this for now. So we'll simply set it equal to 1. Then down here, we'll check if search countdown. Actually, firstly, we'll subtract here. So we'll say search countdown minus equals time dot delta time. And then we'll check if search countdown is less than or equal to 0, well then we want to do our search here. And if we find something, we return false. And if it isn't, well then we don't do any check, then we simply go down here and return true, there's still an enemy alive. Because, and the reason why we can do this, is we are only going to be checking if an enemy is alive if we've actually spawned some enemies. So this is going to work just fine. So let's have a look at what this will actually do. Well, after we've done spawning, we set the state equal to spawn state dot waiting. Then we go up to the update method, which is being called all the time. And it says that, well, if we are currently waiting, then we need to check if enemies are still alive. So in here, we could say if enemy is alive, and this will check, of course, if we have any enemies in our scene. And so if we don't have any enemies alive, this is the same as doing is equal is equal to false. That's the exact same, simply put an exclamation mark there. Well, what do we want to do then? Well, then we want to kind of begin a new round. Then we want to start counting down. We want to set the next wave. We want to increment that by 1. And we might want to let the player know that he's completed this wave and give him some points maybe on something like that. So that completes the current round and begins a new one. And if some enemies are still alive, so else, if we still have enemies alive, well then we simply want to return. Because we don't want to go down here and do all of the wave counting and on all of that if we still have enemies alive. Then we simply want to let the player kill those off before doing anything else. So here we want to begin a new round. And how do we check? Well, we call this method, which says that if we that has the search countdown, and if it hits 0, well then we want to check if we found a game object with the tag of enemy, and if we haven't, well then no enemies are alive, so we'll return false. And if we have, or if we don't want to be checking, then we return true. And there's only one thing wrong with this code right now, and that is we need to set our search countdown equal to, oops, that shouldn't be done there, that should be done here, equal to 1f once we hit 0. So in the instance that our search countdown reaches 0 and there is still enemies alive, well then we want to be checking in 1 second. So we need to set that back to 1. So I think this is pretty much error-free, I hope at least. So we can put in some debug.log statement and see how this is working in just a second. So in here we want to begin a new round, so therefore we'll simply put in debug.log wave completed. And down here we want to, I think we can just leave this be actually. And then the spawn wave, we'll say spawning wave, and then we'll give it the wave.name. And down here we have the spawning enemy method. We of course need to add some stuff to our spawn enemy method in order for this enemies alive to actually work. Because that searches for game objects, and currently we aren't actually instantiating any game objects. So instead of choosing a random spawn point, let's simply just instantiate some enemies at the current position of our wave spawner. So that's just going to be our GM object, and in my case that's at 0, 0, 0. So we'll just instantiate the enemy here at transform.position and transform.rotation. You could also just put in vector3.0 and quaternion.identity if you wanted to have it instantiate at 0, 0, 0. So, and I think it's a bit more logical to have this above. And let's see if this is actually working. One thing you will have to do, and make sure that you do this, is you'll have to go in, find your prefab, and I have mine here, of the enemy, and make sure it's tagged as enemy. If this isn't tagged as enemy, it's going to spawn all of the enemies, and then it's simply going to continue on to the next wave, because it's not going to find any enemies that are alive once it checks. So make sure that you mark that correctly, and you want to be doing that with all of the enemies that you want to be spawning. So now on our GM object, you can see that we have this waves array, and we can maybe expand this to 3. And the first one is going to be alien invasion. And it's going to have this alien spaceship. It's going to spawn 2, and it's going to do so with 1 second. Then we have alien invasion 2.0. And again, the spaceship. And it's going to spawn 3 at a rate of 2. Actually, let's do 1.5. And then finally, we'll have run while you can. And again, the spaceship. And this is going to have a count of 5 and a rate of 2. So now we have these different waves. And in the time between waves here, we'll just leave that at 5. And we want to be able to see the wave countdown. So right now it should get as far as to saying wave completed, and then nothing should happen. So we'll simply return here, just to make sure that things are working so far. So down here we should see, or we should see that it starts counting down. And here we should see that it starts spawning. That's the first enemy. That's the second one. Once I kill those off, it says wave completed there. So that's perfect. And we'll just see that again. So you can see it starts counting down. It spawns some enemies. It's currently searching if these enemies are still alive. And as soon as I kill these off, it says wave completed. Whoops. Cool. So once a wave is completed, we want to make a method that deals with this. And you can, of course, call this wave completed, or you could call it begin new round. I think we are going to call this, we'll call this wave completed. So we want to put a debug log statement in there, and we of course want to be calling it up here. So we'll call wave completed there. Put in this debug.log statement. And in here, we'll first off set our next wave index. We'll increment that by 1. We'll also say that spawn state dot or that state equals spawn state dot counting, because now we want to be counting down again. And of course, when we are counting down, we also want to make sure that our wave countdown equals time between waves. And are there any more things that we want to reset? I don't believe that there is. One last thing that we might want to do is right now when we go past, okay, so we have 3 waves defined here. And if we go above that limit, meaning if we complete the last one here, it's simply going to give us an error once it tries spawning a wave with an index of 3, meaning the 4th wave. So what we can do here is simply say that if next wave plus 1, because that's the next wave we're going to be spawning. This is currently the current wave, and then plus 1 is the next wave. If that is bigger than waves.length plus 1 also, or minus 1 I should say, because of the differences between length, which is the number of waves, and index, which is 0 based. So meaning that if the next wave we are going to, whoops, it's my phone going off there, sorry. So this means that if the next wave we are going to be spawning is bigger than the number of waves that we have, well, then we want to set next wave equal to 0 and debug.log that we have completed all waves. I should say all waves complete. And then we can say looping. So that's simply going to go back and spawn the first wave again. And that's of course not going to be changed in difficulty as is, it's simply going to spawn the wave. But this is where we could add on some kind of stat multiplier. We could also add on a game finished screen, and well done, you've completed the game. Or do whatever, you can continue with the game, start a new scene with new waves. You can do all kinds of stuff in here. This is where the game state is currently complete. And of course, if we haven't reached the final wave and completed it yet, well, then we simply want to continue on to the next one. So this should actually be working now. So if we go in here and hit play, of course, this will all be spawning right here, but we should be able to kill off this wave. And it's going to say wave completed, and it starts counting down again. And we can kill off the next wave. Should have three spaceships, which is it does. And this wave should have 5. And indeed it does. And it should say down here, all waves complete, looping. And it starts spawning the first wave again. Whoops. Actually, that wave had 3. So, okay, so that's because we actually let it do this. So we need an else statement here. Currently, we let it set next wave to 0 and say all waves complete, looping. And then it went down and incremented the wave immediately. So we went up to 1, which is the second wave. But that should be fixed now. So the very last thing that we want to be implementing here is a way for us to spawn our enemies at random spawn points. So in order to do this, we could of course have some complete random spawning where they can spawn everywhere on the map. We just have to check if they spawn inside of a collider, and that's really cumbersome. And I don't think it's something most games need. So instead, we're going to be going with the old tactic of having a bunch of spawn points that we define before runtime, and then simply selecting a random one. So in order to do this, all we need to do is, just like we have this wave array, we also need to create a public transform array called spawn points. And we can define that inside of the editor. I also want to change this to private now. There's no reason why we should be seeing that in the inspector. And basically what we want to do here is, down when we spawn an enemy, we say that we're spawning this enemy, and that's fine. And then we want to instantiate him, but we first want to choose a random spawn point, and we're simply going to call this _sp. And it's going to be equal to spawn points, and then the index that we are going to be accessing is going to be random.range between 0 and spawn points.length. So this means that you have to be sure that you have at least one spawn point in your spawn points array, or this code is not going to be working, because then we don't know where we want to spawn our enemy. But if you do have one, well, then this is going to work fine. And now instead of transform.position, we simply say sp.position and sp.rotation. And we can of course do a quick check here that says if spawn points is dot length is equal to 0, then we want to debug.log error, no spawn points referenced. And I think this is something we want to be doing inside of the start method. So if we go up here, we can check for that. We can also check for waves being out of length and all that stuff. And I'll just leave you to doing that if you want to be ultra safe. But I think this script is actually working now. And let's go in and add some spawn points. So you can see that a new array appears here called spawn points. And we can just maximize or just insert 3 elements here. And this is simply of type transform. So we can make a new empty game object here and call this enemy spawn point. And we'll simply reset the transform on that, and we'll give it an icon, and I'll simply make that red. And I'm going to take this and make it into a prefab by simply dragging it into the project panel. And I'm going to be dragging some of these in here, so we'll just make some more. So we have 3 spawn points, and I'll rename all of these to enemy spawn point. And I think I'll parent all of these to the GM object. I also have a spawn point here for the player. And I think we'll just rename that to... we'll just leave that at spawn point. But we have the enemy spawn points here. And I'll simply drag these out so you can see them in action. And now, and this is hopefully the last time that we have to playtest, we simply need to drag in the spawn points into our array. And finally, hit apply, hit play, and I'll maximize here, turn on the gizmos. It's counting down, and it's spawning enemies at random points. So that was basically all for this video. Quite a long one, I might need to split it up. But I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you find it kind of understandable enough that you can tweak this to suit your own game. I hope that I've made this kind of generic enough that you can actually tweak it and use it how you want to. So thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video.